Welcome to the bar, where the history is vintage and the human stupidity is top shelf. Grab a drink, because 1325, Italy, is about to make your modern problems look like a spa day. And it all starts with a literal Team Edward versus Team Jacob situation. Back then, Italy wasn't a country. It was a messy patchwork of tiny city-states that hated each other more than a Twitter thread arguing about Star Wars. It was basically a high-stakes game of Sim City, but with more plague and fewer delete buttons. The whole peninsula was split into two toxic factions, the Guelphs for the Pope and the Ghibellines for the Emperor. Think of it as the medieval version of the MCU versus DC rivalry, but with more stabbing. This rivalry was so petty that families would wear feathers on different sides of their caps, just to be different. It was essentially an abstract ideology that shaped every bad decision for centuries. One side even cut their fruit crosswise, while the other went straight down. If you think your neighborhood WhatsApp group is toxic, imagine getting into a street brawl because someone drank from a smooth goblet instead of a chaste one. But two specific cities really took the hating your neighbor vibe to the next level. Bologna was Team Pope, and Modena was Team Emperor, making them natural rivals like Batman and the Joker. They'd been snapping at each other's borders and raiding crops for years, just for the smackaroos. In 1249, the Bolognese even launched a live donkey over Modena's walls, to be petty. By 1325, the tension was a big mood for anyone who's ever had a neighbor leave a passive-aggressive note. Then came the legend of the stolen bucket. Stealing a city's bucket is the medieval equivalent of stealing a rival fraternity's mascot. Legend says some Modenese soldiers snuck into Bologna and swiped a wooden bucket from a public well in the city center. Some claim it was filled with gold and loot they'd pinched from a previous raid. Bologna was humiliated and demanded their piece of plumbing back immediately. They were absolutely ratioed by the sheer audacity of the theft. But Modena basically told them to cope and seethe. No offense to Millard Fillmore fans. But even he probably had more dignity than a city declaring war over a bucket. However, the true story is a bit more of a buzzkill for the bucketheads. Real historians, the guys who don't get invited to parties, say the bucket wasn't actually the start of the war. The real trigger was a backstabber move, involving a strategic fortress called Monteveglio. Monteveglio was a medieval He-Man playset that both sides wanted its ruler, secretly switched sides, and handed the keys to Modena under the cover of night. This fort was the only thing standing between Modena and Bologna's front door. Bologna's ego couldn't take the hit, so they declared war to get their fort and their pride back. They raised a massive army of 32,000 men. That's a lot of people to mobilize for what is essentially a border dispute and a bucket rumor. Modena could only scrape together about 7,000 troops. They were outnumbered 4-1, which are odds worse than trying to find a parking spot at Costco on a Saturday. But Modena had a secret weapon. They weren't just volunteers. Bologna's army was mostly untrained guys who would rather be literally anywhere else. Modena had trained professionals and German mercenaries who were built different. It was basically a lobby full of noobs versus a pro-gamer clan. On November 15th, 1325, both armies met at Zappolino. It was late afternoon, meaning they only had about 2 hours of daylight, a literal speed run of a massacre. Modena used the sun to blind the Bolognese and pulled a pro-gamer maneuver. While the main lines clashed, Modena sent their cavalry on a sneaky flank around a nearby hill. The Bolognese army basically decided to nope out of existence. It was the ultimate ratio in military history, as 30,000 men started to panic. 2,000 people died in under 2 hours, for what was essentially a participation trophy. The Bolognese fled so fast they left their dignity and their gear in the dirt. Modena won so hard they didn't even bother taking the city. Instead, the Modenese threw a massive 3-day celebration party right outside Bologna's gates. Imagine your ex throwing a rager on your front lawn after winning the breakup. They even staged mock tournaments to rub salt in the wound before heading home. They grabbed a bucket from a well outside the walls as a final trophy. This is the bucket that actually exists today in their town hall. The reason they took it was the ultimate medieval get good burn. Modena was proud of their artesian wells, fountains that don't need buckets by stealing it. They were saying Bologna is too dumb to understand basic plumbing. To this day, that original oak bucket is still hanging in the Modena town hall. History is just one long, depressing episode of reality TV, and we're all just waiting for the next commercial break. But don't go anywhere, because the Bucket War was just the beginning of the Stupid Reasons for War series. Did you know that peace treaty made Bologna pay heavy war reparations? They paid Modena a fortune, and still didn't get their bucket back. Modena returned the territory, but kept the trophy. It was the ultimate "I am not touching you" move of the Middle Ages. The bucket became a symbol of pride that still echoes 700 years later, even today. Tourists go to Modena to see the stolen pail. It's the 14th century version of a viral meme that just won't die. So next time you're mad at your neighbor for their loud music, just remember the Bolognese army of 30,000. They marched to their deaths for a well bucket and a fortress. And the Modenese, they just wanted to remind everyone they were better at plumbing. Talk about having a massive chip on your shoulder. The War of the Bucket ended the Guelph domination in the region, proving that petty fights have real-world consequences. It was the end of an era, all thanks to a piece of oak. Human history is filled with these really stupid wars. We could talk about the War of the Oranges, or the Pastry War next. But for now, well, let the bucket sit in its tower, judging us for our own modern pettiness. Because, let's be honest, we haven't changed that much. We still argue over arbitrary lines and symbols, while the world burns around us. It's a big mood for the entire human race. So here's to the bucket, the most influential piece of hardware in Italian history. May it never be filled with loot again. And here's to you for listening to a world-weary guy at a bar talk about medieval plumbing. You're the real hero here. Go home, check your well, and make sure your neighbor isn't from Modena. Because history has a funny way of repeating itself. And if they are, maybe just give them the bucket. It's not worth 2,000 lives. Trust me on this one. And join us next time for part 2. See you at the bar.